Okay, that's better. So we're going to look at research design. And research design is basically the planning process, which then results into your proposal. It begins with a concept paper, then which drives into a proposal. So let's begin with the term design so that we can bring it down to research design in its entirety. First of all, what is design? So it is the most basic level of planning. So we are in essence looking at thinking of planning our research on how we intend, first of all, on what we want to do and why we want to do it, and then how we are going to do it. Okay. So essentially, what we are doing is just bring a little bit of order of everything we've been discussing from day one. When we discussed the concepts and we went to research methods, then we got on to literature review, problem identification, research questions. Okay, we are trying to just bring some order into that. Into that once we've begun this process, this is what we're driving at. And then we want to see it from the different perspectives, quantitative research, qualitative research, and if today allows mixed methods, but it is essentially combining the two. So, so the design is a plan that ensures that we achieve our objectives. So the plan itself is giving us the action, the things that are actionable that we can do to achieve our research objective or answer our research question. Okay, that research question that we would have identified. So why do we do it? Of course, we don't want to waste money. We wouldn't want to waste time and energy. The last time we discussed on Wednesday, we talked about, specifically for qualitative research, we talked about the idea of having too broad a topic or too narrow a topic. This can also be the same with quantitative research. You can pick an area that is maybe too small or an area that is too wide for the kind of research you're doing, and that the research design helps you to delimit all of that, helps you to know what you're going to do before you actually do it. So research design is seen as a blueprint for research. Okay. I remember when I was teaching programming at undergraduate level, and we used to talk about the class being a blueprint for all objects. So when we hear the term blueprint, we first hear it, for example, with the architects when they develop a blueprint for a house. So that research design is more or less the same, that at the end, when you implement your research design, we expect a dissertation to have come out of it. Okay. So let's move on to a significant thing about research design. It's not just the researcher, yes, records the important things the person intends to do with a research design, but then also begins to understand what kind of data is he or she going to be collecting, and sampling and analysis and so on and so forth. It's pointing to which direction the person is going. So what exactly is the research design? We see it as a skeleton for the research project, coming again from the idea that it's a blueprint. And then it also guides the researcher on decisions of what am I going to do, where am I going to do it, when, how much, by what means, and so on and so forth. Okay, so it's basically guiding that process. So what does the research, how do we begin the research design? We start by asking these basic questions. So all the things we're doing, when we talk about research design, these are things already we've been saying, but we're simply putting it into the concept of research design. what is it that I'm going to study? Okay. So again, this can begin from I've observed something at my workplace. I've observed something, there's something that is problematic. I begin to conceptualize it. What do I mean by conceptualize it? To take an example, I'm in the ICT, I'm an ICT professional, and I recognize, for example, I recognize the I may recognize maybe the challenge of let's say like in Winfred's case, Winfred, who is very much interested in greening the ICT professional or sector. I recognize maybe at my workplace we are purchasing so many computers, so many ICT devices, and later on, we dispose them, we put them in a certain store, and later on we may decide to hand them over as donation. The people who probably that we're handing them to are never going to use them, and you're wondering what happens to these things. And then Winfred decides, okay, let me read further on this issue of disposal of ICT and what are the challenges that it is raising. And then Winfred finds out that from her literature review, she finds out, there is actually the issue of green ICT or the issue of environmental degradation because of the disposal of ICT. And they begin to talk about so many things, the different things that exist, the different parts of the ICT devices that may cause issues. And then she says, okay, then what can I research on as an ICT professional? What is it that I can research on? And then she can look at how do we manage? She says, how do we manage? How can we do management of ICT waste? Or how can we introduce, in a bid to introduce green ICT? And she can decide to look at this right from the entire life cycle, of ICT that comes into an organization, right from the design, implementation, management, and then later on disposal. Where the greening can be introduced, that this organization, by the time it disposes of an ICT, it has severely minimized the aspect of the idea of it has severely minimized it's what do we call it, that footprint, it's do they call carbon footprint? It has severely minimized the carbon footprint it is then emitting off. It's the footprint that it puts, the carbon footprint it puts in the sector. But you see, she has started by, what is it I want to look at? What is it I want to study about? I've observed something from my organization. Why is this study being made? That is going through literature review. And she's seeing it, and by the time she sees all whatever literature is talking about e-waste and so on and so forth, she's understanding where will this study be carried out. She knows it's going to be done in her organization, because if she has studied that, or that these devices have this, maybe phones have certain parts of them which cause environmental degradation and so on and so forth. She's not a manufacturer. She can't go to the manufacturers and make that study. She's not what do they call, environmental biologists, I don't know what to call them, who is going to make studies of what components cause issues. So what will she do? She knows this is where I am. This is I'm in a specific organization. So my study realistically should be within what is reachable to me. Let it be on ICT management, on how do we manage e-waste throughout the life cycle of ICT. So that's where she's saying, where will the study be carried out? Then she asks herself, what data is to be required? Okay. Now, on the data to be required, it all depends on the research question, on the research approach. And this is where you see the difference between quantitative and qualitative research. Quantitative research is going to be telling us about variables. Qualitative research is going to talk about unit of study. Different types of data that we are looking at. Are we looking at variables? Are we looking at relationships? Or she's going to be looking at a unit of study. Where can the data required be found? This goes back to, where is my study going to be done? Yeah, bringing it back to realistically, what can we do? What period of time will the study be done? Then here is where you think about, why am I doing this study? It's for my dissertation for master's. If it was for a grant, that's a different thing. A grant can take several years. If it's a PhD, even a bit more, it's also some years. What will be the sample design? There's also sampling in qualitative research, but in quantitative research, it's a different matter. What techniques of data collection will be used? How will the data be analyzed, and so on and so forth. So these are just some of the basic questions you begin asking yourself as you're carrying out research. So again, I want to point out, this is not a one-day thing. It is something that you think about, you read, and you, especially when you haven't identified your research problem area properly, okay? So here, you have a guideline of what some of the questions may produce at the end of the day. Questions like what will be what is going to be studied, what aspects of the subjects will be studied, what is the significance of the study. This is essentially chapter 1. Okay, and this could be also your concept paper. Usually your chapter 1 is usually your concept paper, but you'll have a more greater guidance on concept paper, but this is what it is. Now, when you move to literature review, the domain, but again, remember from my instruction the last time, literature review starts even in this area, okay? Let's not imagine that we don't have any literature. We have a lot of literature review in chapter 1. And you remember my guidance especially for Winfred's case, what is it I want to study? I've observed something at my workplace. I want to understand it further. When I say I want to understand it further, this is the area of conceptualization. Okay? To conceptualize it. What do I mean by conceptualize? This is key. Let us say Sheba here we have a tea farm. Then maybe I have a problem with one group of workers. Maybe I have a problem with my pluckers. Every time it's time for payment, they are the most rowdy, they are the most this. That is a Sheba problem, okay? That is a Sheba problem. It's a management problem. Sheba may go to at the end of the day and begin quarreling to others and complaining. These workers, they are so big-headed, they are so and they do not understand, and so on and so forth. That is a Sheba problem. Now, a researcher then begins to conceptualize it. They don't just look at a problem in a workplace, they begin to conceptualize it. Conceptualize it means take it out of its context, and if you bring all the farmers and the issue of pluckers, there's an issue of pluckers, a researcher will begin conceptualizing on the aspect of target workers and payment. And that researcher will then begin to read about target workers. I think target workers is the right term. Those people who come to work for a specific thing, and once then they go. I think that's the right term. I think plackers would be in that category, because plackers mostly are made up of Banyarwanda. Those they are seasonal. They are target and slash seasonal workers. For them, they are seasonal. When okay, right now it's a different situation because we have a tea crisis. But in the normal tea industry or tea sector, during the wet season, we see a big influx of Banyarwanda who are crossing the border, and they come in, and they specifically come to pluck. And so they come with a target of making a certain amount of money. And once they've made it, once they see volumes going down, they go back home. Then the next wet season comes, they cross the border again. So someone can decide to do a research on target workers and payment. Yeah. Payment, something like that. Now, this is what the researcher has done, has conceptualized the problem. The Sheba problem, which annoys her and gets her stressed and so on and so forth. The researcher removes it from its context and then brings it to a higher level. And this is what this stage is. Okay? This stage is conceptualizing a problem that is viewed in an organization, and you take it out of the organization, you take it out of its context, and then bring it to the top, so that now when you research about it, it will be beneficial to all who have this organizational problem. It's not just beneficial to Sheba alone, but it will be beneficial to all who suffer. The question you answer will be beneficial to all, because you've conceptualized it, you've taken it out of its context. Now, at this point, after this point, you come to literature review. This literature review would be about the domain. Okay? So again, depending on the type of research, when we say domain, what do we mean? Depending on the type of research, I think I discussed this a little bit I went a little bit into it. Depending on whether it's qualitative or quantitative or mixed method. This chapter, if it's quantitative, you may be describing some of the, what do we call them? The unit of study. You'll be discussing, you'll be bringing out the unit of study that you're focusing on, if it's qualitative, the unit of study. So the unit of study, say, for example, for the case of Winfred, the high unit of study would be e-waste in the life cycle, e-waste in the life cycle of an organization, of ICT, of the like ICT life cycle within an organization, and should be studying probably should look at what are the different where the different points where e-waste can come in, for example, from the design side. Where can e-waste come in terms of maybe in the strategy side? Where can e-waste come in management, in implementation and management and maintenance? So all of them are management, but in maybe implementation and maintenance. Where can e-waste come in disposal, something like that, and then she would look at, okay, from that aspect, and what are the tools available that can help us pinpoint these, and then which tool am I going to use? That would be her literature review. Okay, and then let's say for the target worker, seasonal target worker, if it is quantitative in nature, this one would be looking at variables. Okay, we'll be looking at hypothesis and variables. Okay, We have someone who is not muted. Benson, do you have a question or comment? Hello, Benson. Okay, so I don't think so. So let's move on. Let's move on with, so if it was a target worker, the target worker, maybe if it is quantitative, the person would be looking for, okay, what hypothesis do I have? And then from the hypothesis identifies variables. So the literature review would be guided by those specific objectives which someone has set. So the hypothesis becomes an objective. So the literature review would be guided by these hypotheses, okay? Because maybe the hypothesis one would say, I don't know, I'm just going to make it up because I'm not conversant with this topic. Someone might say, my hypothesis is going to focus on, my hypothesis maybe is going to focus on target workers, increased maybe work, target workers and salary. Then target workers, maybe the next one will be target workers and reduced salary, reduces maybe the what do we call it, when workers are agitated, the hooliganism, I want to call it hooliganism, something like that. That would be the hypothesis. So the domain would be about these two hypotheses, two or more, okay? Then the third chapter would be the methodology. How do I intend? What methodology do I intend to use? First, what approach? You start normally with what approach, because remember we said approach produces the method. What's the general approach? Do I want to do purely qualitative? Do I want to do purely quantitative? Do I want to do mixed method? And then what methodology do I select? After the methodology, I clearly describe the method. I clearly describe the method and how I intend to implement each, how I intend to answer each of these hypotheses. Okay, how I intend to answer each of these hypotheses using this method. Okay, if it was qualitative in nature, again, the same thing. How do I intend to answer each specific research objective using this method? Then the final thing is analysis. What was found? And this one we hope to cover tomorrow if we finish research design today. What are the results and how do I intend to analyze my data? Sorry, I've gone up. How do I intend to analyze my data? Before I go further, do you have any question? Is there any question?
No, no, doctor. I think you're clear.
Okay, I hope so. So this would be the process in picture, what we would do. I've been trying to bring both quantitative and qualitative, although this particular set of slides is focusing on the qualitative side of things, the quantitative side of things, sorry. So Where do we start? We start with an intriguing observation. For example, I gave you the example of if a researcher came to my tea estate, or for the case of Winfred, and then the person does a little bit more study of the phenomena from literature review. And from that literature review defines their research problem, which then leads to the research objectives and research questions and objectives, and therefore hypotheses. But the hypothesis, before developing them, in defining the problem, they go back and forth with using theory. Okay, so theory helps to define better the problem, because theory then helps you in defining your research question, which later on becomes your hypothesis. So in defining while we are studying the phenomena and we begin to understand the research problem, we go back to theory. Theory helps us to understand our research problem better, or rather conceptualize it better on how we intend to answer our research problem. You remember how we were going in some of the samples I was giving you, showing you how you can go back and use term. So I gave you, for example, if the problem of trying to understand whether online learning does increase the learning, does improve, or does it add to the learning process? Is there increased learning because of it? Or someone may decide to, the research which we pointed out of online banking and the aspects that come with online banking, things like control and so on and so forth, how those affect user perception in terms of usability, usefulness, that impact. So the researcher went back to used term as the theoretical framework. And then here we're talking about a research model. This one could also be called the conceptual framework, something like that. So the term help to further define the research problem or research question. And term then also helped in definition or developing of hypothesis. Okay? So from the hypothesis, this is now purely quantitative. From the hypothesis, we define our variables. Okay? From the hypothesis, we define our variables. And you can go back and look at some of the articles we saw on quantitative research, and so the variables that were picked out from the hypothesis. Okay? So if I can just give an example, sorry, let me just stop sharing this, and we see how we can develop hypotheses, or rather variables. I'm going to share a screen. No, first of all, let me share one of the articles. Let me first pull up the article that we looked at the last time, which was looking at control. Okay, let me just share this screen. So we start with some of the variables that conceptual variables, they talk about control. They say here, control refers to the availability of resources, opportunities, and knowledge to have a specific behavior. The term model does not include control, learned variables, but some authors suggest its inclusion. Specifically, the internal control refers to the knowledge and self-efficacy to accomplish a task, and the external control refers to the environment. It could be interpreted as availability of technology and necessary resources. So now, if we look at the hypotheses that are, here is one. There is a significant positive relationship between control and ease of use. Now, if can we just have an exercise on control and ease of use? So I hope you can see the screen.
Yes, doctor.
Okay. So we have control and ease of use. So control, they said things like accessibility. So accessibility means that can I access a device? Can I access network? And then can I access, what else?
Information.
Information. Then we have another variable, ease of use. Okay, so ease of use, what does it mean? It means it's looking at what does ease of use look at? It means is the you can yes, Dennis.
It could be the response time. That is the time when when you process and when the information that you intend to get is retrieved. Assuming you're querying the database for some, or if you're making a transaction, how long it takes you for that process to complete when you get served.
Okay, yeah. Then what else? Response time. It could also be that some other questions I've seen which measure ease of use are you can do it by yourself without any help.
I think, doctor, you can call that navigation.
How about availability?
Yes. Navigation, availability. Now, already you can see control, if they've said accessibility, We know that's one of the, we know control is a variable, and so is ease of use. So we already know, and already we know what will appear on the survey or the questionnaire, the things we shall ask the respondents. We already know the things that we shall ask as far as ease of use will be concerned. So the hypothesis, you see that the theory guided on the on the hypothesis, and then the variable, and then the variable told us, gave us the things we need to measure that will tell us this is the level of ease of use, this is the level of control and accessibility. Okay? I think so far that one is okay. Not so? Are we okay so far?
Yes, doctor.
Okay. So let's get back to our slides. Okay. So we have seen how we develop our operational definitions for variable. We know what the variables are, and then defining them. And I think that article gave you an example of definition of what each variable is. Then you come to sampling. Okay. So sampling is a little bit complex. I'm not a quantitative researcher, but it's also another area in itself. And I won't lie to you that I'm an expert at it. But however, there are, I think there are even applications online and even people who can help you come up with a sample size if you're doing quantitative research. So once you have your sample size, and this process of your developing variables actually helps you come up, also points you to the questions you need to ask. You come to data collection. Once you collect your data, there is cleaning up the data. This is the part of data coding and editing. We shall talk about analysis hopefully tomorrow. And then you go to analysis and interpretation, and then you refine your theory. Yeah. For example, that paper we saw, they were trying to refine the term theory in regard to adding the issues of control and otherwise. Then you report you report back, and what you report back leads to more research. In other words, you point out when you're reporting, you point out what you found, and more areas of research which other researchers or even you can add to. So that is the cycle of the process of empirical research. But that research design basically starts from this area up to this section. That would be research design or quantitative research. So now we want to talk about some of the things we would consider in research design, especially validation of data. The part where we talk about validity of data. Yeah, we want to ensure that the correctness. This is the term, the correctness of our conclusion, that we have the most precise answer. And if you remember, especially for quantitative research really focuses on getting the most precise answer, not the most realistic answer, okay, but the most precise answer that we can get. So we have internal validity. Okay, this is when internally we want to make sure that the variables we are trying to measure, which we will measure them correctly. And then we have external validity. This is the ability for us to generalize our findings to the rest of the population. Two things, internal validity and external validity. How do we achieve both? We do so by controlling three types of variances. Now, again, I said I'm not a statistician, but what do we mean, or rather I'm not an expert in quantitative research, but what do we mean by variance? Have you ever heard of this term variance? There was one class when I had someone who was really good at quantitative research. I don't want to speak unless there may be someone who knows more than me. Has anyone heard about variance? By silence, I'm assuming no. Let's talk about variance. Specifically, when we've been talking about research, we've been talking about variables which have different values. If anyone who has done research, sorry, not even research. Let me again use a, sorry. Let me again use a white screen. Sorry. Let me again use a whiteboard and demonstrate what a variance means. So that as we talk about it, we all have a clear picture of what we are talking about. So we have an independent variable called age. And then we have another independent variable called gender. And then we have a dependent variable, which is ease of use. Oh, let's consider control. And then we even actually said control may mean access. Access to maybe a device, access to network, let me add here another variable, profession. Now, you will get participant A, participant B, participant C, participant D, who may have, and then participant E, and so on and so forth. Now, each of these individuals have maybe this one, they each belong to different age groups. And again, also gender differs. So does the profession. Now, when we talk about variance, when you pick all their data and you see in terms of age, what data will you pick in terms of access? Then in terms of gender, what is the significant difference in terms of gender and access of a device and network? In terms of profession, What is the difference in terms of access to device and network? Now, if I pick profession, let me just pick profession out of it. When we talk about variance and we have different professionals, and let us say we have doctors amongst them, amongst your participants, you have teachers, you have a business person, a businessman and businessmen and businesswomen. In terms of access to devices, what is the variance? What is the difference? If you were to chart, let me clear this page. If you had a chart which shows maybe doctors in terms of access are up here. Businessmen are up here. Teachers are down here. Yeah. Who else? Another profession, they are here. What is the difference, the scattering, if you are to put them on the graph? What is the scattering, the variance? The higher the variance, depending on what it is, the higher the variance. If let us say, if let us say we were, let me get something even that is more clear. Let us say we were measuring IQ levels. We have two different subject groups. We have male and female. And we got in this class, we measured IQ levels, and we found someone is here, another person is here, another one is here, another one is down here, and these are the males. Yeah, these are the males. Then you have another group, females. And then for females, you find they are much closer. Yeah. Whereas for the men, they were a bit scattered, their IQ levels. Now, what can you this shows variance that if it is closer, then you can say that the females are more homogeneous in their one can conclude that the females are more their IQ level is homogeneous. As for men, which was more scattered, we can say that because there's they are dispersed. They are dispersed in IQ levels. We can say female IQ levels is more homogeneous. They have, but for males in the same class, because they have a scattering, you have scatterings, we can say females may be a little bit more intelligent and may give a more homogeneous result than the males who are more scattered. Yeah. So the variance is the difference between points in the value that is reported by each participant, the difference. The closer they are, the more homogeneous. The more scattered they are, you can say, this one may be, even if one male has a higher than everyone else, but because they are more scattered, you might say, the males, we can conclude, are not as intelligent as the women. Sorry, gentlemen, for using you as an example on the negative side. But have we understood variance?
Yes, doctor. So I understand it that the more closer the numbers or these whatever samples that you're using,
yes,
the lower the variance, and the more scattered, the higher the variance.
Yes, thank you.
So variance looks at the spread of data over
the spread of data of a particular variable. Of a particular variable. Now we are going to look at it, why it becomes significant when we are talking about, where is this one? Yes, this is where, when we're talking about control in both internal and external validity. So now, first thing we want to control is systematic variance. Yeah, systematic variance. What do we mean by systematic variance? Now, you remember we talked about the issue of profession. Maybe profession is a little bit broad. Let us say we're talking about this class, this particular class, and access. A particular class, online students, and access. So if we say that the online student is the independent variable, the dependent variable is access. So we get a picture of our students, our participants, and we get a picture of an idea of the makeup of each of our online students. Now, in the category of students, you have both male and female. You have people from different professional backgrounds. And then we say, without interfering with everything that may interfere with our independent variable, how much does that affect our dependent variable? Okay? In terms of access to a device, access to a network, access to funds, that's so that you can go online. Okay? The funds and so on. For the systematic variance, we want to see that we have as little interference of the independent variable. Okay, as little interference of the independent, there's a homogeneous platform, so that the independent variable has as limited. We want to maximize. We want to maximize, make sure that there's as little interference between them. Then the confounding variables are those variables that will interfere. What did we call them? That word I keep forgetting. Extraneous, yeah. Those are the confounding variables. We want to minimize these. So here in systematic, we want to be as homogeneous as possible, maximize this. Yeah, we want to maximize. Here we want to minimize for the confounding variables. Then we have the error variance. So error variance, what does error variance mean? If we look at our students, we say we collect our data on our students. So we have the actual data that we pick. Then there's what we hoped for. What we hoped for. Yeah, I'm using the most realistic words. And then the error variance is, error variance will be what we hoped for, subtract the actual. Okay, that's the error variance. If we want to minimize the error variance. So we want to get as close to what we hoped for, as we want to get as close to it as possible. Okay, do we make sense there? Have we made sense there on what the error variance could be?
Yes, doctor.
Yes, doctor.
Okay. So the maximal principle is essentially what I was describing, looking at maximizing systematic variance, making sure that that there's as much as homogeneity, we create a homogeneous group of participants. Then we minimize on, we control our confounding variables, and then minimize on our error variances.
Doctor, what do you mean by control confounding variables?
So these are the anything that will interfere, the confounding variables, anything that will interfere with our systematic variance, with our independent variables. Let's control those ones as much as possible. That's where we say your sample size should really pick a homogeneous sample of participants so that you have as limited of interference with our systematic variance or with our independent variable.
I mean, this is not something you're going to measure, but it's something you're rather going to avoid from affecting your results.
Exactly.
Oh, okay. Thank you, doctor.
So in experiments, how do you maximize? You widen the range of values for research variables, where the researcher actually manipulates the independent variable. What do we mean by manipulate the independent variable? You pick a homogeneous group of people. You remember in one of the examples I gave you, if a researcher, let's say the researcher or the person carrying out the experiment wants to find out if online learning has brought about an increased learning, has improved the learning process for a particular set of researchers. And then somebody asked me that, but if you're saying you're only going to focus on, let's say, private universities and exclude the public universities, what am I trying to do? There I'm trying to manipulate the independent variable. Why? The public universities have less online learning than the private universities. The private universities have embraced online learning. So how then can I measure if there is increased learning because of the online tools, yet there's actually no one, or there's very few people who are actually using online learning? That is manipulation. Okay? That is manipulation of the independent variable. I'm ensuring that I'm only going to focus on those participants who have actually used online learning. That is manipulation. Yeah? Another form of manipulation is when we decide to put them, let's say, in a laboratory experiment and without any interfering variable coming into the environment. That's another form of manipulation. Okay, so in both of these circumstances, when you in the laboratory experiment, you put them in a controlled environment. If it's a non-experimental study, you pick a homogeneous group of people and select. Yeah, you say this is why they say appropriate subject selection. Appropriate subject selection. This is the example of picking, let's say, a university where they are actually doing online learning, and I avoid those universities which don't do any online learning. So where do we get errors? Where would we expect errors? One is a poorly designed instrument, your questionnaire or your survey tools. If it's poorly designed, it will cause errors. So one, designing a very good questionnaire is really key. And one of the ways we design a very good instrument, one, as we start the design process, we work with, we have, for example, clearly defined variables. You know, you're going to ask about, we picked some of the things. We're going to ask about access to a device, access to network, and things like that. Two, ease of use. We said we're going to ask about navigation. I can easily move around this application. I quickly get what I want. I can do this without anyone's help, and so on and so forth. So those things measure ease of use. So that's one. Then two, after I've picked them out, I have clearly defined my variables and the questions, the different points that are going to help me measure. I then put it to test. Before, when you design your questionnaire, you don't immediately implement it or administer it. You first take it through a test process. So you get a sample group of people and you test the tool. So when you test the tool, first thing is you ask the people whom you are testing it with, or what did you think about this question? What did you think about this? Is there anything you would change? Is there anything that was difficult to answer? And they give you feedback. Then two, you also give it to an expert, probably somebody who is an expert in that field. Give it also to your supervisor. Hopefully your supervisor is an expert in that area. So that is one of the things we make sure that we have a good instrument, collect data. Two, the result, the error may emanate from your subjects. Yeah. So here, even sometimes you find also sometimes you administer a questionnaire and somebody doesn't fill out the questionnaire properly. Okay. Or you've picked the wrong subjects to participate in your study. So this is where you make sure that let us say that you pick an appropriate subject where you're going to collect your data. Remember again the question which one of you asked me, that why are you avoiding the public university? Yeah, the reason why I'm avoiding is that this one has not experienced the phenomena. So picking an appropriate subject area, study subjects. Okay. Contextual factors that reduce a sound, accurate measurements. Yeah. So this is again where you pick the wrong subject areas or the wrong context. Do we have any questions so far?
Yes. Hello?
Yes, please.
What if it's a new area of study that doesn't really have a lot of research, but you want to explore more?
That's a very good question. What if it's a new area? Then that research should be qualitative, not quantitative.
Okay.
You see the questions that Jan is asking? What if it's a new area? Then that research should be qualitative, which is going out to explore. It's a very good question he's asking, because this now then points to an explorative research, which is quantitative in nature. I think have I answered your question?
Yes, doctor.
Okay. How do we control the confounding variables? These may or may not be the primary interest of a researcher, but they will interfere. So they will produce undesirable variation, or they mislead, they may bring weird results. So these must be controlled. So here we have an example. If I can first remove this. So here are just some examples. They are on the medical side. Someone maybe in studying hearing problem, you may find the issue of blood pressure comes through. Okay. In showing in vitro children who are being born through the process of in vitro fertilization, you may have a correlationship with eye tumors. Now, a person's study may not have decided to focus on that. So how would you control these confounding experiments? One, conduct experiments in a controlled environment, laboratory studies. That is one of them. Selecting, subject selection. You're selecting subjects that match in an experiment. Remember what the earlier comments I'd given on selecting a homogeneous set of participants? Okay. That is another one. Random assignment of subjects. This one can also control. So in a survey, this is where sampling becomes important. You only include subjects that are appropriate for what we are studying. So if I gave this one, when we say those who have appropriate characteristics. So if you're looking at online tools and improved learning, we only focus on students who are actually using online tools. You avoid anyone that is outside of that. So this is just a recap to give you guidance on research design. In quantitative research, you should have a full range of variables that you want to study. You want to have precise and accurate measurement. Identify areas that you can control. Appropriate subject selection, triangulation supports. So with that, we conclude quantitative research design in quantitative research. Do we have any questions so far? Do we have any questions so far before we go to qualitative? Yes, Arthur?
I'm not a question, but my experience this week, I was filling out a questionnaire, but I realized that the questionnaire didn't apply to I lacked a domain knowledge, and even to my field didn't apply. So I end up not filling most of the questionnaire, like most of the parts were actually very blank. So when you talk of appropriate subject selection, that's very important, because if it doesn't apply to them, then they will end up giving you vague information.
And you can imagine when they get your questionnaire, they will have to actually remove you from that section. You will actually be removed as a participant. And now that was really inappropriate selection of participants. That's a very good example, Arthur. Thank you. So
So doctor, if I was to ask, in such a case whereby you've given some people questionnaires, and where there is a part that they will not understand, so you leave it out blank, doesn't it? Maybe out of the 10 questions, one knows around 4. So does it give a wide range of understanding does it give the actual purpose of the research?
Now, what will happen for Arthur's case, who didn't answer, when they collect the data, when they're cleaning the data, Arthur will be removed.
Doctor, I even did submit the questionnaire. I'm like, it's useless, it's pointless. I didn't submit it.
It's pointless. So Brian, in that case, Arthur will be removed. When they're cleaning data, Arthur will be removed, because there is, in most cases, he hasn't answered most of the questions. It's not about his understanding of the subject. It is that the researchers did not select appropriately who should be part of the research. Brian, have I answered your question?
All right.
Yes, John.
Does a lot affect the quality of the research itself? Because if you have a sample space of 10 people and you say maybe 10, sorry, 4 or 3 haven't really answered completely, doesn't it really affect the research itself?
Of course, it does affect. That is why appropriate selection of your subjects is important. Appropriate selection. It's really, really key.
Appropriate selection of the questions or the targeted, the participants.
It is both the questions, because remember that your instrument must be well designed. Two, if your instrument, let me give you an example. If you are targeting, you're looking at you're studying online tools and how they improve on the process of teaching and learning, and you send a questionnaire to me, Sheba Nyakaisiki, who is actually using online tools to teach. And then you also submit it to students who are also learning. You're studying the 2 points of teaching and then the learning process, if there's improvement. And you find me, Sheba Nyakaisiki, I failed to answer your questions. Who is actually using? That points to your instrument. It was poorly designed. Then there's also designing a very good instrument, and then you submit it to a lecturer who is not using online tools. And then it becomes the case of Arthur, who fails to answer, meaning you've administered it to the wrong subject. Do you get the difference between, do you understand where the error comes in both cases? Okay, so that is where, yes, Arthur?
So I'm wondering, Doctor, because assuming you've made appropriate selection of your subjects, what allowance can you give to cater for, maybe even though someone might be using the technology that you're assessing, they may not actually submit their response. So what allowance could you say, maybe if you're targeting 10 people? From experience, what would be your sample size to cater for such errors, such scenarios where maybe some have not submitted? What would
where
be the
someone has
sample
not
size?
they are an appropriate part, but they have not submitted.
No, like what I'm asking, like for example, if I'm targeting 10, how many should I actually send out? How many? What should be my, maybe say 100? If we're targeting 10, then sample for 100.
Send as many as possible. For quantitative research, my advice is send as many as possible, because the higher your response rate, the better. So this is also one of the risks of using quantitative research, where your respondents fail to answer. Or they simply see it, but they don't fail. They see it, but they refuse to respond. It's one of the risks with quantitative research. I hope I've answered your question, Arthur.
Yes, Doctor. Thank you.
Okay, let's move to qualitative research. So I hope we can see the slides.
Yes, Doctor.
Okay. So we want to look at the same thing, but from the lens of qualitative research. So although I don't like critiquing one lens over the other, but normally this is what you find, that there's always a critique, one critiquing the other. So with quantitative research, there's no real contact with people. And it can be, we are looking for a precise answer. We're not looking for a realistic answer. We're looking for a precise answer. That is usually the criticism that goes on between these two philosophical viewpoints. So whereas quantitative research is looking at something measurable, qualitative research is looking for a holistic picture, a realistic picture. So qualitative research is conducted in a field, a real life field. It's looking for a holistic answer to a question. And normally, as the researcher is getting into a research, or is getting into the field, and they are picking data, themes begin to emerge. And I think I've mentioned this before, how themes begin to emerge with qualitative research. So the main focus is to understand the way people are doing things and the reasoning behind people's actions. So qualitative research, we say, is naturalistic. It is realistic in nature. It's post-positivism. Post-positivism because quantitative research is positivist in nature, but here we're going beyond the positive outlook. So normally we are looking at case studies. So we're looking at a phenomena which is bound within a specific system or a certain context. We are looking at ethnography, so we're exploring the nature of something, the nature of a phenomena. So all of these basically talk about the nature of qualitative research. And I don't want us to waste too much time on these, but let's focus on how we would begin our research. So most of the time, they will tell you that qualitative research begins, normally we start with data collection, okay? And that may not be the case. So sometimes we may begin from literature review. We have observed something, and from observation, we begin literature review. And so we start by focusing our inquiry from something that we have observed, something that may come from literature, and then we begin to formulate our research questions. So as we formulate our research questions, we determine our unit of analysis. Now, this is where we depart from quantitative research. Quantitative research, which focuses on developing from research questions, they go to theory and then develop hypotheses. The research questions tell us on what is our unit of analysis. And here, I tried to relate in our previous research, previous slide, sorry. So let us go back to Winfred's research questions or research area of interest, where she said, let her begin looking at green computing. Green computing. And in green computing, she said, let me look at e-waste. E-waste in an organizational setting. And then when she did her literature review, maybe looked that there were so many things as far as e-waste was concerned. Then she said, let me specifically look at e-waste in an organization. And then I look specifically at e-waste management within an organizational setting. So when she says, what is my unit of an analysis, she's going to look at the life cycle and management. That is her unit of analysis within an organizational setting. And when she says from the life cycle, then she says, okay, then what data am I going to collect? I'm going to interview people. I'm going to look at field notes, what I've observed. I'm going to look at diaries. I'm going to look at documentation. That will be the data I collect. So that will lead to my sampling. So the sampling in qualitative research is quite different, okay? So let me just move a few slides ahead. So I may look at intensify sampling. So this is where I'm looking at everything that could possibly, intensity sampling, I'm looking at every single area. I'm looking at photographs, I'm looking at interviews, so on, and I'm going to look at every single area. Another person where someone says, I'm going to typical case sampling. So in this case, the focus will be the average population. I'm going to do interviews, maybe do focus group discussions, and just leave it at that. Snowballing is typically with when you say, I don't know who is going to lead, I don't know who I'm going to ask questions. So in snowballing, I speak to maybe an expert. Yeah. So the expert points out people who would know about green computing. That is snowballing. So the expert points me to person X or types of people X and types of people Y. And these then lead me to others, to Z, and so on and so forth. So this is snowballing, where somebody says, I really don't know who to talk to, and the first people nominate others whom I can go and talk to, and my data keeps growing. The other type of sampling is when I use theory. Okay, so I'll give you a typical example of where theory guides. For me, I decided to use a theory, a rural development theory, and specifically it was called livelihood framework. So the livelihood framework guided me on who I should talk to in the rural context. Okay, in the rural context. So depending on the theory you decide to use for your problem area, it will guide you on your sampling, on who you should talk to. So if I can just go back here. So on sampling, I think I've covered that area on how we go to sampling. Then we go to data analysis. And I think I gave you an example of data analysis on qualitative research in one of our previous research, on our previous lectures on how we can do analysis. So this slide, although I'm just going in between, this slide simply points out research in the perspective from a qualitative side, inductive and deductive. On inductive research, I think I talked about it's not how wide you go, but how deep. So the volume of data, although you're picking from different areas, it is rich in terms of the number of people, the number of things you use. A person can decide to use observation, looks at diaries, looks at documentation, then interviews, and all of those become sources of data. Inductive, the person is probably using just a questionnaire, but depends on the number of people. How many people have I interviewed? Inductive, the person may have just used one case study, but has used interviews, has used focus group discussions, has looked at documentation, has used photographs, and so on and so forth. So it's how deep, not how wide. While inductive, it is how many people. Do we have any questions so far? Do we have any questions so far? If no, let's move on. Sorry, here I'm going up instead of down. So what is the role of the researcher in this? Because qualitative research involves, let me first see if there's a question from the group. No, there's none. So what is the role of the researcher in qualitative research? The role of this researcher, because you're so close to your participants, it is important the researcher remains emotionally detached, which can be difficult when you are heavily involved with your participants. You may easily pick sides, and it is important not to pick sides, to report as is. Yeah? Theoretical sensitivity. Your research, one of the ways to maintain validity is to keep, when you have a theory guiding you on who you select and how you interpret, this really grounds your research. So having a theoretical framework is extremely important for somebody's research that is leaning towards a qualitative side. Being insightful, being insightful is taking time to think about what you're listening, what you're hearing from the case study. Okay, so insightful leads to snowballing, not just in who you talk to, but in terms of interpreting what people are trying to say. Perceive situations holistically. Be sensitive to your personal bias. If you have any personal bias, it is important when a researcher, a qualitative researcher is carrying out research, one of the things you recognize is as I'm listening to participants, I take note of what they're saying and make sure that I report it without bias. What do I mean? I think I gave you I don't know if I gave it to this class, but let me repeat it for the sake of giving an example. When I was in the field, I remember one of the participants saying that as community health workers, they needed transportation so that they could move from home to home. So they were trying to advocate that they be given bicycles. So afterwards, another researcher who was with me pointed out that, look at this man. He's asking for a bicycle, yet he has a whole border, or motorcycle. Why doesn't he use that? And I found myself agreeing with her. But as I was agreeing with her, I remembered, that was a bias on my part. I should discard it. I should report specifically what the community health worker asked for, what they feel as community workers they were entitled to. And so I had to discard my personal bias. So a qualitative researcher must constantly go back and do an evaluation of what they think and feel about something so that they avoid bringing their thoughts and feelings into the data they are collecting. Okay? Into the data they are collecting. That is important. It's very different because the qualitative researcher is immersed in the research. Whereas the quantitative researcher is very detached. You've simply sent a questionnaire and you don't know the feelings of the participants as they give you the data. So what is the role of literature? Yeah. So sometimes they tell us that with qualitative research, you start collecting data before literature review. But literature review, because you're basically going out to explore. It's exploration and it is seeking description. So sometimes there may be an assumption because there's little research about your phenomena, but you can't do with literature review. Why? Because you know the unit of analysis or the unit of study. The unit of study does have some information about it, and this is the domain. So, for example, Winfred's case. Winfred, there's a lot of research on green computing. Winfred would have used green computing, first of all, the literature, to narrow down on her research area. Two, she can also then do research on on where exactly within organizations does e-waste emanate from. Okay, she can do research on that at purchase level, at management level, at maintenance level. Where does any of that literature review can give her that analysis or that data? Then in terms of actually designing something and implementing it, that's where she gathers more data. So what kind of data can we collect? So what is most common is interviews. That is the most common format of data collection. Yeah. So we have structured, where you have very specific questions. Then you have unstructured. Yeah. So the structured interview questions are very specific, where you ask your participant. Then you have useful follow-up probing questions. So depending on how your participant responds, you will have follow-up questions. Or what did you mean about this? Yeah. Then you have the unstructured questions, which can collect large amounts of data. And this can be especially found in focus group discussions. Then you have observation. You can collect data through observation, either overt or covert. Covert means hidden, and overt means what is actually out there that you can see. So covert would be maybe you give participants something to do and you observe. Yeah, you observe in a hidden format. You observe in terms of maybe you participate in their meetings and there are things that you observe that you didn't necessarily decide to find out about them. Then there is participation in a particular event or setting. So this is also one way you can do covert or overt observation. You can do photographs or videos. That can also be a good way to collect data. As people carry out their work, take an example. If even I've also observed, I did participate in an I don't know if it was an experiment, but there was a time I was participating in a project. It started with a South African university, which wanted to develop an e-learning system specifically for the African universities. So they brought on board other African universities. So it started from South Africa. So they got other participants from other African universities, Nigeria, Kenya, Uganda, so on and so forth, to participate in developing this system. So at a certain point, they wanted to determine ease of use. So they asked some of us to log in and do certain things. So as they were doing that, they were recording our navigation, how we were using the system. So that was one of the qualitative means to observe how we were using it and to see how easily we could navigate throughout the system. So another what they call unobtrusive measure of observation is collecting documents of an organization. And that is another way that you pick data to see maybe how an organization handles or is bothered about a particular thing. So take an example for Winfred, she can go through documentations to see where there is any sensitivity of her organization on e-waste or green ICT. Research diaries are another, especially if you are spending time with a particular case study. As the researcher is observing, they keep a diary of what they have observed. And another key point about these research diaries, this is where you begin to record certain themes, certain concepts and themes as they develop, you begin to record them as you're observing, what you're experiencing as a researcher. As a researcher is in the field, they should have an ethical checklist just to make sure that they are honoring their commitment to confidentiality and privacy. Yeah. They getting informed consent, because remember, you're observing participants. So you need to have informed consent, that you inform them that, oh, I'm a researcher who's come here to do this and this. Do you mind if I sit with you? Anything I observe, I will keep it confidential, and so on and so forth. And so basically it is having that informed consent, because you are basically intruding in participants' private space. Generating, yes, Arthur, you have a question or comment?
Doctor, I happened to attend one of the defense. Yes, I happened to attend a defense for what happened today. I think it was by Florence. But then, like, from the discussion that I joined late, it seemed as though in the research, she included the names of the participants she was interviewing. Under what scenarios would that happen in terms of like privacy?
Where she includes.
Under what circumstances would you include the names of the participants?
Yeah, and that is a big no-no.
Yes.
Including names of participants is a big no-no. You when you are reporting your data in the chapter where you do data analysis, let me just show you an example. Let me show you my chapter 4. Or rather, it was my chapter 6. Give me a minute.
Maybe also, Doctor, to ask, how come this issue is never raised? Because like on the panel, no one raised that issue.
I don't know, and what kind of research was she doing? I would need to understand what her research was about.
It was about lived experiences of returnee Ugandan migrant domestic workers from Saudi Arabia. She was doing a phenomenological study of the lived experiences of returnee Ugandan migrant. I don't know. I think they willingly volunteered to like provide the information. I don't know if there was some kind of agreement she had with them, or maybe the nature of her research needed to include such experience.
I don't know if they were willing, but anyway, maybe they were. But let me just share with you. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes.
So remember, my research was qualitative in nature, unit of observation. First of all, I had a code. Yeah, I coded. So HF1 was for the health facilities, a particular health facility. And then I said it's the unit of observation. Then I had respondents underneath that. And then the method I used. Then I had HF2, which was another health facility, and the individuals that I interviewed. Then I had the VHTs, the VHTs in India, and here the method I used, and so on and so forth. Then the SP was those were the SP would be the social value partner, okay? The partners that were involved, then key informants, yeah? So I had also key informants. But in all of them, I didn't include any name. Yeah, I didn't include the names or the particular people. So even as I reported, as I was reporting, in an interview with a community member from Munkozi, the respondent said, was asked to give her opinion of the biggest challenge. And I reported, so in any of them, no names were given. So I don't know for that particular research, why they opted, but maybe they accepted to have their names given, but if they didn't give consent, it would be a big no-no. Generating validity in qualitative research.
So, Doctor.
Yes, please.
Is stating the name of institutions also okay?
Yes, stating the name of the institution is okay because the institution would have allowed to participate.
Okay.
The institution would have allowed to participate. However, there are certain things that we must understand. There are ethical considerations. It depends. One, it depends on the research you're doing. If, for example, now in this case, it was about my research was about designing an application in a rural context. So in that case, really stating the name of an institution doesn't have so much of an impact. But let us say I was doing a research on drug addiction. That is a highly, highly sensitive matter, highly sensitive. So naming an institution or individuals would, in fact, that if I was doing that kind of research, my research would first need to go through an ethics committee. Yeah, it would need to go through an ethics committee because that kind of research is very, very sensitive. Very different from my PhD research, which was on a subject that was not controversial, not even controversial, but was not sensitive. So it varies from the research to research. So like my research didn't need to go through an ethics committee. But if let's say you are doing something like doing research maybe on homosexuality, drug addiction, or things, or doing research maybe that would need you to maybe if you are doing a drug tests on participants. So let us say, for example, remember this gentleman who developed this COVID drug? Was it COVID-X? I don't remember what it is. And they were saying they needed to carry out tests. So for him to actually carry out tests of his drug or his concoction on anyone, he actually needed to go through an ethics committee.
Thank you, Doctor.
Okay. So now with qualitative research, how would we come up with validity? Just the same as we would with the quantitative research. So one is self-conscious research design. Yeah, self-conscious research design. So this is where we would ensure that we are reporting what the research, something that where the personal, you as an individual have no ties to the research topic that we are talking about. I think in this class I gave you an example of the time when I was with the research, when there was a research workshop and there was a lady who was presenting research on the land wrangles between the land disputes that were raised, that came up as a result of historical colonization events. So specifically the land disputes between Buganda and Bunyoro. So I think some of you may be aware that there was land that was taken from Bunyoro and given to Buganda because of Buganda's collaboration with the colonizing group of people. So when the lady, I remember when she was presenting her proposal, her emotional attachment could be seen. You could feel her emotions rising as she was presenting. So as she was doing so, I remember the participants told that some of the panelists asked her that I think you need to change your topic because it is clear you have an emotional attachment. So one, picking a research area where you're not emotionally attached. Yeah, so that is one of the things that helps. Then also, as you're carrying out your research, to constantly go back and ensure that your biases don't interfere. That is one. Your sampling decisions. Yeah. So being led, because qualitative research, you can't sample the same way as you would sample in quantitative research. Talking to people who are actually involved in the phenomena, who are actually being part of the phenomena. Because you're going out to explore, you can use several sampling techniques. So talking to people who are directly involved, two, using the snowball effect, allowing the one thing lead to this one person you've talked to lead you to another person who may know more and like that. So going as deep as you can. Employing triangulation. I think I gave you an example of triangulation, like for example, what I did, where I used interviews, group discussions, and I said, okay, let me also employ a questionnaire with the same group of people to see if this will lead further. Then when you're generating data, prolong engagement with the field. The longer you are in the field, the better for qualitative research. Remember, again, it's not how wide, but how deep. The longer you are in the field, the more you observe, the more data you collect. Demonstrating persistent observation. Again, the longer you are. Providing verbatim transcripts. Yeah. So it is very important that as you interview people, make sure you transcribe your data. What is transcription? What is really important for qualitative researchers, as you're interviewing, record. Real recording, either use your phone, record the interview. Then afterwards, type out the transcript. The interviewer asked this question, and this is how, and you type it out verbatim. Verbatim means word for word. Okay? Is that clear?
Doctor, I have a question.
Yes, Rachel.
On that issue of providing verbatim, does that mean you pick out like the most captivating that are working for you throughout the document, or like most of the time you have?
Sorry, Rachel, you've kind of fallen off. Hello, Rachel. Okay, maybe Rachel has a network issue, but can all of you hear me?
Report verbatim that are captivating. Yes.
Sorry, when we say providing verbatim, it means I am recording. Take an example. We are having this lecture, we are recording. Verbatim transcription is that somebody types out everything we've said word for word, not missing out anything. Okay, let me show you an example of where verbatim reporting, one of the results of verbatim transcribe. Sorry. So again, I'm going to share with you so you see these quotations I've given. Rachel, do you see these quotations I've given within my chapters? This was my chapter 6, yeah? This was verbatim, exactly what the person said.
Yes, please.
Then you look at this one, money. Money is a problem. I could have just said money is a problem. You might have this, but I went ahead and wrote exactly what the respondent said.
Oh, yeah. Yes, please.
That is what verbatim transcription means. Is it clear for everyone also?
Okay, yes, doctor.
Yes, doctor.
Okay. External validity, that was internal validity that we're pointing out. How do we do external validity with the qualitative research? Now, we normally do qualitative research within a case study. So you have, let's say Winfred is doing her research at the, with Uganda Police. Now, let us, first, Winfred would have conceptualized the issue. She would have noticed that should have started with the Uganda Police. She notices that they are purchasing, they are purchasing and implement and setting up ICT, ICT, or either in the command center or in offices, whatever it is. So this, she conceptualizes it to be organizational. Sorry, let me use a whiteboard. It will be a bit better. So let us use the example of Winifred, who has observed. She has observed that Uganda Police, year in, year out, is purchasing. They design, they select, they implement, then they use. With use, we have maintenance. And then you have, eventually, you have depreciation. And then eventually you have disposal. And then the big question of all of this, we have e-waste. Yeah, we have e-waste. So she will conceptualize this to come to organizational e-waste management. Okay, so she may read about organizational e-waste management, and now she wants to actually implement, to study it under Uganda Police. But Uganda Police is not the same as, for example, Uganda Matters University. It's not the same as NSSF. Where does the case, she wants to study e-waste. Uganda Police is in which category of of institutions, where would we put it?
Security organization, security.
Security. But it's not just security, because we have many. We have private and we have public. So for it, it's public. Eh? So one, she would place her study in the case of Uganda. So she would look at organizational e-waste management in public security, this would be security organizations, or e-waste management. Should start from here. E-waste management in public security organizations. The case of Uganda Police. Why? She's now generalizing her research to public security organizations. And the case of Uganda Police, she's actually even bringing it down to developing countries. That's how she begins to generalize. That's one. Second, how does she begin to generalize? She gives us a description from literature of public security entities. But is the Uganda Police a security agency? Winnie, can you give us a better idea? Is Uganda Police a security agency? We may be is Winnie in class? I may be asking and she's not in class. Is Winnie in class? Yes, she's there. Winnie, we may be misassigning. Hello, Winnie.
Yes, doctor.
Yes, is Uganda Police, would we say Uganda Police is a security agency?
It is, but the word agency, we just look at it as a security, a public security. What do we call it?
Entity.
For it is broader.
Let's call it a security body.
Security
Yeah.
body.
It's
Yes.
bigger.
It's not just an agency, it's a body.
Yeah.
Okay. When you have collaborations, let's say with the police, maybe in the Netherlands, what do you call that?
Pardon, doctor?
When, let's say, you have a collaboration with the Dutch police, what do you call that?
Sometimes we refer it as intersecurity agencies, but then you see the word agency brings out some kind of group, not everybody. Like for us, it's bigger, but then not all of us will participate, depending on what department is involved. So maybe that's where the word agency comes in from.
Okay.
But police as it is bigger than an agency for sure.
Bigger, it's a body. So, okay, for lack of a better term, let's call it public security organizations. Yeah. So for her now, Winfred's case, she's generalizing it to security bodies. Yeah, she'll generalize it to security bodies, so that she avoids pinpointing her research to maybe NSSF or maybe to a public entity like Uganda Matters University, things like that. She will first, then she will give us Let me first clear this. So in terms of topic, we see how she has generalized it. In terms of domain, yeah, she will talk about, first of all, she will talk about e-waste management in general. Then she will talk about e-waste management sorry, the spelling may not be right, in organizations. And then more specifically, this would be very brief, and so would this, but then she would come very, very detailed in e-waste management, in public security bodies / agencies. Yeah, she would give us a description of this. In e-waste management, she would get the domains that need to be talked about, or rather in this section, the domains. Maybe the domains would be in terms of in design and selection, in implementation, in maintenance, and so on and so forth. But specifically, it was in security bodies, she would be giving us the context description or context uniqueness. What is unique about public security bodies in terms of how do they design and select? How do they implement? How is maintenance carried out? And how is disposal carried out? For example, in terms of design selection and purchase, government has its own unique way it does its things. In terms of maintenance, government has its unique way. So she would be giving us that context so that in that sense, when she does that, let me first stop sharing here. When she does that, let me come back to, when she does that, her case study, in terms of comparison, she must be comparing her particular case study to case studies that are similar to hers. These are public security agencies or bodies. Public being a keyword, security being another, and yeah. So her research is organizational, yes, but within the sector of public security agencies. So what Winfred would be doing is give a generic description of public security agencies with the specific case, within the specific context of e-waste management. Yeah, she gives us that. Then when she comes to her case study, her particular case study, which is Uganda Police, she then relates Uganda Police to other case studies. Do you get what I'm saying?
No.
Doctor, which are those case studies that she would relate police to?
Sorry?
You've said she would have to relate the police to other case studies. So I'm wondering, other case studies.
In which category is Uganda Police? Public security agencies. Okay? So one, she starts her literature review on public security agencies. And their utilization of ICT. Because it is in utilization of ICT that the e-waste is generated. Not so. Literature review, I'm talking about literature review, not the actual data collection, literature review. At that point, have you gotten that point? Let me first stop sharing. I come to this one. Let's go back to the whiteboard. We are wondering, how will Winnie generalize her findings? How will Winnie generalize her findings? She's going to do her research with Uganda Police. How will she relate her findings, validate her findings with other, sorry, let me close some of these, with other security agencies, public security agencies. Let me just call it agencies rather than bodies. How will Winnie do that? That is the question. Now, Winnie, before she goes into her collection of data, Winnie is going to first do a literature review and give us a description of one, public security agencies. Specifically, what is she going to describe? She's going to describe purchase, because purchase points to purchase of ICT, because purchase, this points to design, implementation, and design, selection, and implementation. She's going to give us a description of ICT use, because this points to maintenance. Then she's going to give us a description of, sorry, I'm making this smaller, how they dispose of ICT. This is all from literature review. This description is from literature review. What is she doing? She's giving us a generic description of what normally happens in public security agencies. What is she doing here? She's relating her case study, Uganda Police, so that her findings, yeah, her findings will be related to most public security agencies. Am I making sense?
Yes, doctor.
Yes, that is the first step when we begin to validate our findings in qualitative research, the first step we make. Now, let me come to, let's first discard this. I want to first clear this so that I also give another step, how you validate. Another way we can do external validation is using multiple cases. Let us say Winifred just doesn't want to focus on public entities. She wants to look at generic organizations handling e-waste in any particular organization. Winifred will employ a multiple case study strategy. So let us say she decides to use Uganda Police in one case. In another case, she decides to look at a bank, let us say Centenary Bank. And then the other case, let us say she looks at which one? I was going to say NSSF, but NSSF is government pointing. Let us say she looks at Uganda Matters University. This is a multiple case study strategy where she looks at e-waste management, the entire life cycle, for each of these cases. So what she will output can be generalized. Okay? So in this time in her literature review, rather than looking at public entities, she will look at the generic, the entire life cycle management. That means she will be looking at from the time an ICT enters into the organization to the time it leaves, from design, selection, implementation, to disposal. So she would even say, I'm going to use enterprise architecture, because I think enterprise architecture is the most generic, enterprise architecture as my theoretical framework. And I use this and I have a multiple case study strategy. Oh, sorry. My goodness. Sorry about that. I thought I was. Sorry about that. Let me share. So sorry about that. Let me repeat that. Let me repeat all that I've just said. So, what are we looking at here? We said another strategy for generalization. I hope you can see my screen now.
Yes, doctor.
Okay. So another strategy Winfred can do, where she would say, for me, the solution, the answer I want to provide should not be for public entities alone. It should be for any organization. So what Winfred does, she employs a multiple case study strategy where she has more than one case study. So she can decide to say, my first case study is Uganda Police. My second case study is Centenary Bank. And my third case study is Uganda UMU. So these are organizations from different perspectives. And then she says, let me have a generic outlook on ICT management. And that's where I will develop my framework for e-waste management. So she says, I'm going to use enterprise architecture. So for the non-ICT students, that is IS, enterprise architecture, I think you will have it as well. It's kind of a very generic framework used to manage ICT. So Winfred says, I will use this to study the entire life cycle of ICT from the time it enters an organization to the time it leaves. And there develop an e-waste management framework. And then I implement it in all my cases. Evaluate, and then give to the world. This is my feedback. She has implemented it in all 3 cases and evaluated and gives feedback. That in the Uganda police, this was the feedback, this was necessary, this was not necessary. In Centenary Bank, this was necessary, this was not necessary. In Umu, this was necessary, this was not necessary. And where there's a new addition, she adds for each. And she develops that generic framework for all 3 cases. That creates external validity. Have you understood both ways of doing external validity for qualitative research? Is that, are both clear?
Doctor, we are following.
Okay. Now, with qualitative research, one of the key things is that when we talk about generalizing, we need to be very cautious and do it in moderation. One key point, whatever finding you get, as you're reporting back, use statements like, this probably means. That's the language you should use. This probably means. Recognize the limitations of the time periods you're researching. And at the end, when you point out the limitations, you state, this research leaned more on qualitative and used such and such case studies which are limiting. We recommend the next research maybe takes a quantitative approach or uses another method or another approach to validate these findings. Okay? So there needs to be a great deal of caution as you're reporting back. Do not have very, very conclusive answers that this means this, this means that this is true and this is no. Always have that cautiousness as you report back. Honesty and transparency about the findings and any contradictions that you may have found, report them. So we need to be very, very careful with qualitative research and generalization. Data triangulation, I think I've reported this out clearly. If you're doing research, depending on how much money you have, if you can have another person who observes and then also gives you feedback so that you try to make sure that you are using, it's not just your observation. Multiple triangulation, this is where you use more than one method. And methodological triangulation. If you can use more than one method, well and good, but also this can be expensive and time consuming. So you may want to consider using multiple data collection tools. If you can use another observer, well and good. But yeah, those would try to cover up for generalization in the qualitative research. Transferability. This is where transferability is where the example that I gave you, where let us say you are talking about your case study, you try to relate it to other case studies that are of a similar situation. Dependability. This is where you have an audit trail of your data. Record your interviews, any focus group discussions, record them, then do a verbatim transcription. Again, confirmability goes back to dependability, where you do verbatim. credibility, use of persistent observation, stay as long as possible, have as long a period of time as possible with qualitative research. So this is just a summary of what we have been talking about. You can go through it. So if we have any question, we can continue discussion. I wanted to post, I've not yet posted my question. I wanted to post it later tomorrow. Today, I don't think I will. But if we have any question as far as this research is concerned, please.
Yes, Doctor, thank you for your presentation.
Yes, please.
I want to ask a question about the expression where your study area is not attached to any organization. It is a general problem that, for example, when a tool like WhatsApp was coming up, it could not be that it is targeting a certain group, certain body. It was general problem. It was coming up to benefit the whole population. So how would you go about that? The sampling, the generalization, and yes.
Are you talking in terms of, okay, the problem itself? Can it be theoretically backed up?
When it is theoretically backed up, but now you want to do sampling, and then after that you generalize. I find it hard. Maybe if what will be your case study, and after that, how will you validate your findings?
My question is, what is your research problem?
Not necessarily that I have it at hand right now, but I'm citing an example. For example, if a problem, for example, COVID was a general problem, it had come, and it was a world problem. People were doing research. Only that one could apply. They could go to hospital and find some patient and do experiments, things like that. But if I'm looking at a situation where, for example, you are talking about, maybe you want to do a research about e-learning tools in high school. It is a problem that is affecting maybe the whole Uganda. So how would you go about that? What could be your case study? How could you generalize?
Now, let us go to a very generic problem you said that was affecting the whole world, COVID-19. Okay? Now, first things first, who is looking at this problem? Is it a scientist? Is it an ICT professional? Who is looking at it?
Maybe ICT professionals.
COVID-19 ICT professional. This ICT professional is in which context? Is it an ICT designer? Someone who comes up, an innovator? Is this an innovator?
Yes.
It's an innovator. So an innovator would be thinking, what solution can I find for the population? So in this person would also then say, for this population, in what context? Because they're not going to look for every problem. Is he looking for the population? Are they learners? Are they organizations? Is it government? Is it the health sector? So in other words, what I'm pointing out to you is at this point, you're beginning to narrow down your focus. Because this problem, you're not going to solve everything. You remember when we talked about identifying your research problem? You're not going to solve everything. As a researcher, what are you going to focus on? So if, let us say, you are an innovator and you are looking at learners, and you're thinking we have learners that are at home, and you want to design and implement an online learning tool. Okay? So even if you say, I don't want to focus on a particular case study, even this online learning tool, you're not going to develop a generic one that does synchronous and asynchronous. Okay? You're going to have to be specific because you're not going to design a multiple faced thing. You're going to design maybe a synchronous tool. A synchronous tool for which context? Is it for an urban context? Because this population, we have urban and rural, and all of them have different contexts in terms of access, in terms of availability, in terms of, so for which population? Do you realize how I'm narrowing down your problem for you? So in other words, by the time you start thinking about sampling and so on and so forth, you must have had a clearly defined research problem. Am I making sense with my with my guidance? I don't know if I'm making sense.
Sense, doctor.
Yes, you must have a clearly defined. You can't simply start sampling when you don't have a clearly defined research problem. That's why the beginning is always a clearly defined, let me delete this, clearly defined research problem, which leads to a research question. Start with that. Once you have that clear, then you will know, is this problem, can I answer this with a quantitative approach or a qualitative approach? If it is qualitative, then if it is quantitative, what method? If it's qualitative, what's the method? If it's quantitative, what's the method? So I think, was it Moses who asked that question?
Yes, doctor.
Yes, so Moses begins with, what is your research problem? Before we start talking about sampling, what is your research problem? Do we have any other question or comment? If we don't have, can we then say we call it a night and we meet tomorrow, where we'll look at data analysis? Blaze is saying, you said you'll give us sample papers. I'm going to look for some and then post them. Sorry?